It's time for us to do something.
Well, good evening and welcome to Pellowe Talk Live. It's not Q&A. You are going to have the wild and unpredictable conversations here that are not going to bow to political correctness. And if this was an episode on the ABC tonight, you would probably be seeing their complaints channel blow up. Well, to open this evening, I've got some pretty hard things to say. It's an opinion that I'm publishing now because there are a range of emotions that I've been feeling, and I think there's a lot of people like me. Perhaps the two feelings that I'm feeling as a conservative right now is disappointment and grief, but not in the way you might assume if you're at all given to making assumptions. I'm disappointed at the collective mainstream media, including those outlets normally reliable for at least some right thinking and honesty. Their reporting of the US election and Trump's decision to not prematurely concede a most irregular election can only now be described as malicious deceit. It's too kind to call them biased, it's generous to call them prejudiced, and it's inadequate to describe them simply as fake news. Most of them are deliberately lying. I can't accept there is such multiplied gross incompetence amongst these swarms of university-educated journalists that they have collectively failed to honestly investigate and even-handedly report the plurality of voting irregularities in nearly all of the swing states. I can't believe none of them are old enough to remember the 2000 presidential election, which was decided by the Supreme Court of the United States more than 30 days later in December, and therefore to be forgiven for thinking they and not the duly authorized umpires of electoral disputes are entitled to anoint the winner of this election. By the way, how galling is it for Australia's would-be Christian conservative Prime Minister to preempt the American electoral process and congratulate the manifestly corrupt wannabe president when the incumbent has not yet conceded and the proper legal processes have not been completed, and thereby enabling the lying media's pathological deceit. Whose side is he on? Truth? No. Conservative law and order? No. The American people? Clearly not. The mainstream media? But I digress. News.com.au today tweeted an article labelling it an update with the extraordinarily partisan claim President Trump is, quote, refusing to accept his humiliating election loss, end quote. What election is the writer Alexis Carey describing? Is it the 2020 election when the collective corporate media predicted a humiliating destruction of the Trump administration by at least 7, if not 10%, as in the Washington Post, but reality proved perhaps only a paltry 2% differential, the margin of error in the legally irrelevant popular vote? Is it the 2020 election when President Donald Trump received more votes of support across the nation this time than Hillary Clinton or any other presidential candidate in prior history? Surely all the self-gratifying journalists tubining all over the internet about the humiliating Trump campaign couldn't be talking about this year's election, where Trump massively exceeded expectations with precisely the voters the Democrats claimed to be the moral champions of, in contrast to the Don, according to Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire. Indeed, it seems he won more minority votes than any Republican in 60 years, according to exit polls. While Trump's white male support dipped by 5%, it rose among women and minorities of both sexes. 17% of black men broke for Trump, as opposed to 13% in 2016. His support among Black women doubled from 4% to 8%. Latino men and women both rose by 3%. This dynamic is the opposite of what you'd expect from one of the most racist presidents in history, as Biden and the rest of the Democrat Party have dubbed him. That's from Matt Walsh at the Daily Wire. Biden Democrats can claim no mandate for their divisive identity politics and the critical race theories adopted by the Democrats at the Washington swamp and the mainstream media. In a campaign that the Democrats and mainstream media, but I repeat myself, determined was all about Trump, his personality and character, the arrogantly expected Democrat gains of up to 20 seats in Congress certainly did not happen, despite large-scale Republican retirements. The opposite is set to happen, with Republicans likely to double their ranks of women and pick up 7 to 12 additional seats in addition to retaining control of the Senate. That Democrats will probably retain control of the House, Congress, is thanks only to an actual blue wave in 2018, which gave them a 235 to 199 advantage going into this year's election. That lead has now been significantly eroded, and the usual midterm in 2 years, the usual midterm backlash against whichever party controls the Oval Office will further reduce, if not eliminate, their lead, making a possible Biden presidency all but useless. The extraordinary amount of money thrown at this election by Democrats to subsequently see their Republican targets not only survive but thrive on the Trump train is the most glaringly obvious election humiliation this year to any honest observer, which journalists are not. Collectively, with some notable exceptions, of course, the once noble profession of journalism has become a debased trade of turning tricks, selling their virtue to any exploitative John willing to give their warts and wrinkles a second glance and part with $2, and lying to everyone they know about what they really do for a living. Screw the nation just doesn't get quite as much approval in polite company as journalism when they're asked about what they do to earn a dollar. But that is their job. It's vulgar, it's promiscuous, it's family wrecking. But that's just another story in the day of the lying media. They're pimped out by editors and mastheads who brought you the remorseless undefinition of words like marriage, healthcare, and gender. They were unfaithful to their devoted readers who only wanted the truth in return, for better or for worse. They prostituted themselves to unsubstantiated and baseless allegations of Russian election interference in 2016 and Trump abusing his office to investigate fraud in the Ukraine, only to then claim election fraud was impossible in 2020 and the documented Biden influence for cash in the Ukraine was disputed. Can anyone doubt the heat that they would have brought to bear if a son of Trump instead of Biden had such damning evidence discovered on his discarded laptop? Can anyone doubt Twitter and Facebook wouldn't have batted their adulterous eyelashes at any article exposing those facts? One needs little imagination to speculate. The crushing electoral defeat Trump would have wreaked on any Democrat candidate if the lying media's thumb wasn't on the scales, if the playing field was level. Their job is not ad sales and entertainment, but honesty and integrity in reporting with clear delineation of news from commentary. Their duty of care is to equally scrutinize both sides of the aisle, not to simply pay lip service to balance and fairness in reporting. The lying media's intent in prophesying massive Republican losses under Trump to moderates like Biden and Harris was clear, as is their desperation to now vindicate themselves with the faintest glimmer of hope for the Biden bid. To that end, they have their fingers in their ears and their eyes squeezed tightly shut as they shout, "Biden, Biden, Biden," like a pagan invocation of the dead, as if they can summon his political resurrection. The addled husk of a man who ended his campaign days before breakfast, who could barely attract a Girl Guides troop to a handful of public rallies, and who even in the final week introduced his granddaughter in a public street as his long-dead son, is to be pitied for the horrible disease he's so obviously being ravaged by. But the lying media then compared the boundless campaign energy and indomitable crowds of Donald Trump and told us Biden was a shoo-in. This, despite the egg already on their face following the actually humiliating defeat of Hillary Clinton in 2016. Now they fuel scorn of the president for refusing to concede, but instead vigorously pursuing every legal option to count every legal vote and ensure the important election was both free and fair. They willingly ignore that the hashtag #NotMyPresident embodies their monolithic rejection of election results since 2016, and that their beloved Hillary Clinton advised, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are focused and relentless as the other side is, end quote, Hillary Clinton. The lying harlot, also known as mainstream media, is setting America up for deeply wounding anger when the courts remove illegally cast and counted votes, should that be the final result and Trump declared the winner. They willfully ignore the incomprehensible fact of counting in secret, banning Republican observers from meaningful access, and fighting, then ignoring court orders requiring it. Can you imagine if the Australian Electoral Commission staff excluded Liberal Party scrutineers and locked them out of counting or told them to stand on the other side of the school hall after ballots closed? It's beyond belief, comparable to the most corrupt Marxist regimes in developing nations, and at best, deeply suspicious. Yet, the lying harlot asks no questions, raises no flags, credits no query. Instead, in Australia, they decry former MP Joe Hockey as irresponsible for countenancing the very probability that fraud always happens, at least on some scale. Never mind that the US courts ordered a new election after just such mail-in voter fraud just months ago. That's in the state of New Jersey. But now, when unsolicited ballots were sent to millions of people across far more than just one small state, the lying harlot promises her lovers cheating just isn't possible, and she's offended and angry at the very suggestion. They repeat the lie that Trump has had no victories in challenging results in court, ignoring even the court order that Republicans be given meaningful access to scrutinize counting. Supreme Court of the United States Justice Samuel Alito also ordered Pennsylvania to segregate ballots received after 8 p.m. on election day, and, quote, that all such ballots, if counted, be counted separately, end quote. Why? Because the Pennsylvania election law states explicitly that for a ballot to be validly cast, it must be received by election officials before 8 p.m. on election day. Despite various politicians and judges presuming to be authorized to change the election law and extend that deadline by 3 days, they can't. That can only be done by duly passed legislation. Count every legal vote is surely an uncontroversial statement, unless you're a lying harlot who will be exposed for the morally ambiguous media they pretend to not be every day. Now, Pennsylvania has 20 electoral college votes, and 21 is all the lead Biden has. When SCOTUS flips that call and Trump wins just one other of the disputed states, Trump would be declared the winner by those authorized to make the call, not the lying harlot. I fear what will erupt on the streets of those Democrat cities which were boarded up before the election in the certainty of violence when Donald Trump was re-elected. The lying harlot has repeatedly insisted America is divided, denying the reality of the mosaic beauty of the diversity of 350 million individuals She mourns the delays in imposing her preferred vision of society, uniformly progressive ideas like industrialized child sacrifice, universal but unsolvable white racism, and infinitely expansive and intrusive government. She has assembled the kindling, stacked the dry wood, stories deep, and is now hosing fuel onto the social bonfire to be lit by the election umpires, overturning her impotent and premature election call. I grieve that the coming mayhem was completely avoidable if mainstream media had been faithful to their vows instead of giving birth to Joe Biden's bastard election. If perchance the exhaustion of legal avenues confirms the media's call, there will not be the same city burning, mostly peaceful rioting in Republican cities as has marked Democrat cities in 2020. In one sense, it seems easier to surrender to the will of the red light district, which mainstream media has become. It's far harder to fight for justice and truth, to demand irregularities be remedied and the electoral laws followed to the letter of the law in the spirit of constitutional fidelity. But anything less is to sell ourselves, our families, and the future to exploitative slavery, to unscrupulous mercenaries. So fight to the last we must, and for once and all, give up hoping for honesty or faithfulness from the lying harlot. Well, that's how I feel. I'm interested in what you think. Strong words, I know, but did I make the case? Am I being too hyperbolic? To join me now is tonight's expert panel, and welcoming back the queen of Twitter, as I heard in a recent famous podcast, Alexandra Marshall. Welcome, Ellie Melly.
Oh, I would not like to be mainstream media after that spanking you just gave them.
Well, I don't want to be mainstream media either. I think the good source and the interruption that the internet brings to the provision of news is the right place to be. And I do have to apologize to the good journalists that are out there, some of which who are generous enough to come onto my show, which is still brave and valued, because they do tell the truth. They do take their vows to honesty properly. But let's introduce the rest of the panel. Kurt Marlberg, welcome to Pellowe Talk. Good to have you back again.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be back with you guys.
And also for the first time tonight is Damien Coury. Welcome, Damien.
Hi, David. Great to be here. Good to see you.
Now, I'm just going to read your bio because for a lot of people watching, they may think that name, that face rings a bell. Well, Damien was born and raised in Brisbane and recently returned to the city after 2 decades abroad. He has 20 years experience in corporate public relations in Asia Pacific, specializing in executive communications, skill training, and coaching, issues management, and crisis communications. He's the former managing director of the Hong Kong and Taiwan business of Edelman Public Relations. I'm going to have to get you to explain that, Damien. One of the world's largest independent PR consultancies. He previously spent 13 years as a senior radio and television journalist. This is where you'll know him from, in Australia with Network 10, 3AW Melbourne, 4BC Brisbane, and the ABC. God bless their cotton socks. Damien was news director at Brisbane's Triple M FM 104 in the early 90s, rock on, and he holds an MBA from Australia's leading business school. He lectured and developed courses in PR and crisis communications for postgraduate students at a leading Hong Kong university. We're privileged to have you join us. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here, David. Thanks very much. I applaud what you're doing, and as a fellow traveller in the new media landscape, I think what you said before was quite right. That people are going to seek out media they can trust and journalists that they can trust and rely on.
Yep.
And I think the numbers have been really quite clear, and the numbers haven't been reported appropriately by the media at the moment in Australia.
Look, if they just admitted they were biased and didn't call it fact, didn't call it news, but called it opinion and commentary, like I do.
Exactly.
This is opinion and commentary. I'm a Christian. I'm conservative. Wearing my heart on my sleeve. Interpret it and filter it as you wish. But
I mean,
talk about the facts and then have a debate on it. But I'm actually blown away by the number of Facebook warnings I've got this week. I have maybe got one or two in the past few years. I'm very, very squeaky clean by Facebook community guidelines. But just reporting the debate is now getting us in trouble. And I promise you, viewers, we are this close to being kicked off social media. And the only place you're going to be able to get honest news and views you trust is in your inbox and on the websites.
Well, I hope social media learn the lesson and understand that they can't continue the way they're continuing without eventually facing regulation. They may get very light treatment under a Biden presidency, but there will continue to be pressure on social media outlets like Facebook and Twitter if they don't start to just be a little bit more balanced in their approach. But that's a whole other topic.
Well, it is a whole topic, and it's a deserving topic because the media have absolutely corrupted themselves.
We don't talk enough about how this election is going to impact social media and the open forum and the independent press, because that is the real loser with a potential Biden victory. We are going to see basically an apocalypse of free speech.
That's sobering, and I don't know how much his executive orders could affect on that. I think the expansion of executive power is a remarkable phenomenon, but he's not going to have the cooperation of the Senate for a very long time.
No, I think it'll come from what he doesn't do, David, rather than what he does, anything he might do. So it'll be an extension of the fact that he'll just not bring in the kind of regulation and restriction that's required, or he won't tackle the real issue, which is, whether these platforms, because at the moment they have protection, they describe themselves as platforms, not publishers, and that gives them protection that publishers don't have from things like defamation and contempt of court in countries like Australia. So that protection is fundamental to their business, and they rely upon it to continue doing what they're doing. And if they don't have that protection, then they would have to be held responsible for everything that's published. And if they want to keep that, they really do need to get their act together and be a little bit more balanced and responsible, be a true platform that doesn't interfere with commentary on one side of politics more than it does on the other. So I think Biden
all Biden needs to do is look the other way, and we're in big trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, Damien, that it's not so much what Joe Biden will do, but what he doesn't do. And I think in particular of just say the last 2 years, the landscape on social media has changed dramatically in just the space of 2 years. Forget even 4. Just look back over the last 2. And right up until, the midterm elections in 2 years' time, to imagine how much more it's going to change, how much more censorship takes place is it's almost difficult to imagine, because the pace of everything seems to keep increasing. And what I'm mostly concerned about, I think, is the undergrounding of any voices that are not progressive, not left-wing. And what that's going to do is make those who are on social media assume that the world is the way that they see it, when in fact that's entirely skewed, and you're going to have an entirely almost alternate universe out there that people don't even have contact with. And that is, to me, a recipe for some kind of civil unrest.
Well, in every civilization in history, once you start censoring problems in society, they grow, they do not get better, or they do not go away. And that is when you have discussions turning into actions, and that's not what we want. We want to have a free and open forum to make sure that we can have the conversations we need to have as a civilization. And that's not going to happen with social media heading the way it's heading.
Yeah, and it's the pressure cooker thing, like in China, for example. If you don't release the pressure on a continuous basis and let people voice their opinions and move the dialogue forward, you're just suppressing everything all the time. Eventually that's going to pop. And then your suppression has to get stronger and stronger and more forceful, as we're seeing in China now. So where that leads is not healthy, as history will attest.
I like to compare it to blasphemy law. They always say, we'll be much more peaceful if we prevent blasphemy. And you look at countries who don't allow it, and they are not the most peaceful and open and tolerant countries. So it's the reverse of what people assume and what is preached. It's the same with free speech in politics. We have to allow an open forum otherwise people start to get a little bit hostile.
Absolutely. Damien, would you update us the latest news, the latest numbers, how some of those disputed states which the mainstream media thinks are irrelevant are panning out?
Yeah, look, not to insult anybody's intelligence, because this process is really confusing, and a lot of people are not familiar in Australia with the American system, and rightly so. So if those of you who understand the American system, just bear with me a moment. I'll just explain it to those of us, the people who don't fully grasp it. But basically, it works on an electoral college vote system. So there are 538 electoral college votes, which means to win, you've got to get 270. So just one more than half. So this 270 to win is the goal. Each state has a different number of electoral college votes allocated to it, and that's basically based on population. But it's a formula of population plus 2. So you get 2 extra for each state, and the idea of that in the framing of the system in America was to make sure that the really populated states like Florida, Texas, New York, and California didn't dominate every election, and that the smaller states had a little bit of an extra say. So you wind up with each state having, states like Georgia 16 electoral votes, Arizona 11 electoral votes. Now, what's unusual, because in Australia we would say, well, okay, he could win half of those, or he could win, like seats. It doesn't quite work like that. In America, it's basically first past the post count in every state. And if you win the state, you get all of that state's electoral college votes. There are some weird exceptions to this I won't waste your time with, but that's generally the rule. There are a couple of states that do split them, but they're not terribly significant. So in other words, if you win a state, you get those points, the whole number of electoral college votes allocated to that state. Okay, so where are we at in terms of what the mainstream media is saying? You're hearing that Biden's won. We're at a position where the mainstream media have given Biden 279 of the electoral college votes. So what that means is he's got the extra 9. He's well over the 270. And they've got Trump on 214. Okay. Now, there are a number of states that haven't yet been called that have to be added to that total. And 2 of those states are razor thin, really, really close, Georgia and Arizona. So Georgia, we have Trump behind by only 13,000 votes in a state that's got like 5 million votes. We've got 99% counted. So there's about 50,000 votes still to count, and Trump's only 13,000 behind there. So there is a possibility, a slim one, that Trump could catch up. This is not talking about any sort of, this is just purely on the votes, no legal issues coming in here. Arizona, 98% of the vote has been counted, and Biden is 14,000 votes ahead. So there's still, this is about a 3.3 million vote state. So there's still about 66,000 votes to come in, and Biden's 14,000 ahead. So there's still hope for Trump there. And North Carolina.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. I'm very sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
I've lost internet connection here at the studio, so I'm going to duck off and leave you guys to have a chat by yourselves for 5 minutes. I'm sure you'll do very well, and I'll be back as soon as I can. But sorry to interrupt, but that's why I'm going to disappear for a second and leave the 3 of you alone.
Not a problem with us. You go to the staff over here.
I'm connecting via mobile right now, so we've got a backup solution if necessary.
All right. So that's Georgia and Arizona that could still go Trump's way with a bit of luck. North Carolina is a really fascinating one, because in North Carolina, on election night, with 95% of the vote counted, Trump was 77,000 votes ahead. With 98% of the vote counted, he's still 74,000 votes ahead. So he's managed to hang on here. So he has 50% of the vote, and Biden has 48.7% of the vote in North Carolina. But guess what? The media haven't called this state for Trump, which is fascinating, because with much closer states, they have called it for Biden. So, that's an indicator of a certain degree of bias right there.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just pretend that all the votes are real, even though it seems to be a bit of a big question for this election. With the votes as they stand, do you think, looking at your numbers, that there's any chance that Trump can actually make it to the White House, or on those votes, is it definitely a Biden victory?
No, it's not definitely a Biden victory. It's most probably a Biden victory, but there is, and it's totally understandable why Biden might have seized the moment on Sunday and done his big staging, because that's a PR thing. You jump on the momentum and you drive the momentum and you try to get everything behind you so it looks obvious that you're going to win. And he's done that very, very well. And he has a very, very, very strong chance of actually winning. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is people calling for Trump to concede, or people saying that Trump's being stubborn because he hasn't conceded. There's no grounds here for Trump to concede, and it would be inappropriate for him to concede at this point. Because let's just do the maths, Alex. If we look at Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina, the three states that I was talking about, in those three states, Georgia's 16 electoral votes, Arizona's 11, North Carolina's 15. So that gives us a total of 42. If you add the 42 to the 214 that Trump's already got, you're at 256, right? So he's still 14 short. Now, of the other states that are still in doubt that we haven't talked about, that Biden's apparently leading in, you've got Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. Pennsylvania and Michigan are 20 and 16 electoral college votes, respectively. So if Trump picks up North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and one of those, he's the president. So the path to victory is slim, but the path to victory is not over, and there's no reason why he should be conceding.
To that 214 that have already been assigned to Trump, Damien, has Alaska been added yet or not?
I would have to check that. I think it has. Alaska is not really in doubt, I don't think.
I know it's not in doubt, but as far as I know, I don't think any major media organizations have called it yet, which is unusual. I think it might be because they hadn't gone through many of the votes yet to count them, but it's going to be a Trump win. Obviously, it's a red state. So
yeah, it is in doubt. It's 62% to Trump, though. So I think they would have already. No, actually, they're still saying it's too early to call. So you've got a point there. On the map I'm looking at, so there's 3 electoral votes in Alaska, so that could actually help. With that, he might get across the line. Would he? With Wisconsin? Wisconsin is 10. 10 plus 3 is 13.
Still shy of one.
69. It would be a dead heat. So we don't want that outcome to feel.
It's funny, like with Dave, he was talking about Al Gore and how we should all remember him. And I had only just started a high school when that whole Al Gore thing had. So I didn't realize that he had to go to the Supreme Court and then he lost. I mean, I knew he was a pain in the neck because we had to suffer through all his wonderful crusading for, the global apocalypse. But I didn't realize they had a bit of an embarrassing time there for a while in the political sphere.
Someone sent me a President Gore headline in a Washington newspaper.
That was debunked.
It was debunked, yeah. I thought it might
have been debunked.
Mock-ups they do, because they always make 2 versions before the election.
Great comedy, though. Props to whoever did it. It was very funny.
Imagine if we had President Gore. So I think there's still a path to victory. Now, if you look at, just the switch in the votes is quite extraordinary. The state I'm most interested in terms of any nonsense going on is Michigan, actually, because on election night, with 72% of the vote counted, Trump was on 2.167 million and Biden was on only 1.858 million. There was 300,000 vote lead for Trump, with only about 1.4 million votes to count. So when you've got a 300,000 vote lead, there's only 1.4 million votes to count. You think you're doing okay. Now with 99% votes counted, Biden's in the lead by 150,000 votes. He's on 2.795 million to Trump's 2.646 million. So 150,000 in front, which would mean that out of that 1.4 million that were left to count the other night, Biden got 900,000 of them and Trump got 480,000 of them.
You guys remind me of the guys on election night who were there, looking at their sports bet, and they had the news on one side, piling through the numbers, trying to work out what was going on. I don't think we're going to know until it goes through a court the way things are headed. But I'm looking at the comment on Twitter, and people are talking about not just the numbers for the particular states, but there's no question that this election is in doubt as far as the sanctity of the vote itself and whether or not these are really free and open elections. And I mean, we were talking about if it is a fraudulent election, not because we don't want Biden to win, but because there has been highly suspicious activity. What do both of you think about what it actually means for the next 4 years, regardless of who wins? Has there been significant damage done to the election process in America?
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, because there's so much doubt cast, I guess the road to victory for Trump is quite narrow. So that's, as a conservative, I'd hope he gets in. But for me, what's more important actually is the security of elections in America. I think in Australia, we're quite blessed. We have the Electoral Commission, and that's a federal agency that governs, I think, federal and state elections here. And I'm sure fraud takes place to some small degree, but nowhere near to the degree that it happens in America. I've heard it suggested that particularly in both Philadelphia and Detroit, that there's almost a bit of honor among thieves when it comes to cheating, fraud on elections. And so that's obviously part of America's legacy, but it's because of the mail-in voting system this year, it has been so much more tarnished and a lot more doubt has been thrown on it. So the best hope, I think, for conservatives, or not the best hope, but perhaps what should be the primary hope for conservatives is that this whole mess just gets cleared up, that the Trump team takes their case all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issues some sort of a ruling that actually cleans up elections for the future. Because what is the point in having elections if you can't trust the result, if you don't know for sure or know within a certain, reasonable extent that the result that you're watching on your TV screens reflects reality? That's a really serious problem.
Well, I know that I think it's France has outlawed mail votes because of the problems with fraud and corruption. So it's not like it isn't a widespread problem across the world. We know there's an issue when people aren't required to show up at a polling booth and get stamped and go away. I think Australia has a similar problem with the fact that we're letting our pre-polling go from being a couple of days to weeks and weeks and weeks. And of course, the longer an election period drags out, the more easy it is to steal an election by various means. We do have the benefit of having compulsory voting, but of course, we all know it's not a perfect system. There has been electoral fraud in Australia's past. And so now the discussion that's coming up through the ranks is, should we be requiring one proper electronic rolls that cross your name off when you vote, whether it's by mail or in person? And what we're going to do about voter ID? Does anyone want to have a chat about voter ID, whether it's a good idea, or our own elections in Australia, if we could suffer a similar problem to the US?
I absolutely think we should. Oh, sorry, Damien, I'll let you go.
Right. I was just going to say, I think, and you might be actually the best person to talk about this, but blockchain might be the answer. Blockchain's a technology where you have, it's basically a technology of a public ledger that sits everywhere but nowhere, if you like. And so everybody in real time can see what's actually transacting. And so it just delivers absolute transparency to everybody. So if the electoral roll was somehow, and there would have to be some way to protect private information, but if there was some way that the electoral roll was visible to all on blockchain, and then people were crossed off, I think there are technological solutions that bring trust into the system, because a closed electronic system or closed technology system is just going to raise more questions, right? We've already got questions of China tampering and who owns what ballots. I think there was something going on. You're just
sure because you come from Hong Kong. You've got a different view.
Blockchain's a bit of a buzz thing. It was going to revolutionize banking, but that's a whole other story. But the fact that you can see it and it builds trust in, because it's everybody's computer. It's not sitting on anyone's server. It's in the cloud. It's accessible to everyone, and it's real time, visible, transparent change without getting too complicated. But the technology exists, and that's the technology that could actually solve this problem of keeping the rolls transparent, open, visible, and not able to be tampered with, which would be lovely.
On the topic of voter ID, it is funny. This election in America has caused me to reflect on elections I participated in here in Australia for many years now, and it is amazing. There is a huge amount of trust, I think, that Australians have for the system and for each other. But when you see the level of dishonesty that potentially has gone on with, I guess the various videos and different things that are being shared regarding America's election, you realize that if people want to be dishonest, there's a lot of ways to be dishonest, particularly with the mail-in issue. And I am not at all opposed to the idea of voter ID. I think that would make things a lot more secure. And the main argument against that in the US seems to be that to require that is racist, because it requires minorities to go down to the DMV and get themselves a driver's license or some other form of ID, which apparently is too difficult for them. And my response is, well, that's a racist idea to think that it's too hard for them. I saw a really good PragerU video interviewing people in Harlem, northern part of Manhattan, New York, and essentially just asking people in that community. Most of the people that were interviewed were Black African Americans, and they asked, "Is it difficult for people in your community to go to the DMV and get a photo ID?" And they're like, "What are you talking about? You just walk in." And they just scoffed at the idea that it was difficult, or that it was racist to suggest that should be required. They thought that was a joke.
Minorities don't have an identity. I mean, that it's the culmination of the ridiculousness of identity politics, that you can have identity politics for people who don't have identity. I mean, what are they even thinking?
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually incredibly condescending. To have ID is very low bar.
One of the great things that's come out of this election is the swing to the Republicans of the African American vote.
Absolutely.
I think Trump had 8% previously, and that was pretty much 92% of African Americans did vote Democrat. But I think the Brexit movement, led by Candace Owens, and you've got a lot of other Black conservatives now becoming very, very public and vocal, saying stop with the condescending, white liberal neo-Marxist critical theory nonsense. Thank you very much. Sorry.
The white savior complex they have deeply embedded inside them is coming out.
That's right. And it's a lot of people are just saying, sorry, I'm walking away from that idea and that way of thinking. I don't see myself as unable to go to the DMV and get a identification card. Thank you very much. And we're looking at now at probably 16 to 18% African American vote for Trump.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say we have a similar problem with America. You were talking about trust that Australian voters have with each other and the system. But at the same time, we've got the state starting to come after our private press and the open forum. So we are going down the exact same route as America.
You guys have been doing great. I've been listening on my mobile while I've been wandering around and trying to connect with the NBN service and say, hey, guys, what's going on? But, yeah, it's my whole address. The studio is just completely lost. It's nothing technical we did wrong. It's out. But anyway, this
shade of red.
I'm sorry about that. It's the laptop webcam. I will just try and clean the camera. Does that help? No. Well, and my background's an incredible shade of green, so it's something to do with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I'm sure.
You're basically the Labor Party right now. Well done.
You can make me want to switch to my iPad. Maybe that'll be better. An Apple instead of a PC. Really interesting conversation. Thank you guys for keeping it going. Feel free. Yeah, I actually don't have anything to take it to. Just to say hi, I'm back.
We could
sorry.
Politics after this election, because we're talking about what was happening at the election day, and I was at CPAC, and when I was there, we were having a discussion about what that would actually mean for the future of conservatism. Is this going to set us back a lot, having Trump lose the election? Because Scott Morrison, as we've seen, has come out and gone almost straight toward Biden, and he's leaning heavily into the renewables and heavily into the net zero in 2050. We all seem to be sliding toward the left, and those sentiments got booed on stage amongst the conservatives who were there at CPAC. And I think that's more representative of the blue ribbon base. And so what do you guys think is going to happen if our Liberal Party start chasing Biden's green policies at the UN? Any thoughts on that?
Trouble, I guess.
We're hot on the mic again.
My guess. Sorry, David. It's a bit. Okay, I was just going to say, sorry, it's a little bit slow, so I don't always pick up when someone started talking. Perhaps it will spark more of a populist kind of movement that we saw in in, with the vote last week in the US, though Trump, hasn't yet won. There was a massive turnout, and he's clearly a populist leader. And also Boris Johnson, he has turned out to be a bit of a, I don't know, bit of a fake conservative, really. But there was a massive populist backlash against, what was a fairly far left Labor Party. And so perhaps we could expect to see that same sort of thing in Australia. That would be my assumption. But
yeah, look, I think it's a culture war issue. The movement is doing really well. The green fear movement is working very, very well. They're winning the debate on not just on climate change. I mean, even people who, like me, who accept that the temperature is rising a little bit. We don't believe, people like me I don't believe that we should be restricting Australia's coal production, for example, because it will have absolutely no impact. It's only going to hurt Australia and impact poor people and our economy. So I'm not in favour of that sort of policy. But we're losing that debate. There is no question about it. And we're losing so many debates in the culture wars at the moment. We've got to get a lot better as conservatives, as classical liberals, as libertarians in telling our story. And I think the main failing that we have is the failing of all conservatives and people on the centre right to right side of politics all over the world, which is we just continue to fall into the trap set for us by the left, where they have us defending the economy, and they're the ones that are pure and holy and defending, the poor and healthcare and all of those sorts of things, failing to see that there's actually a connection between those two things, that you can't actually deliver good healthcare services, you can't actually take care of the poor, you can't have a good social security platform if you don't have an economy that's healthy. And to have an economy that's healthy, you've got to promote your producers, you've got to promote your people who are smart and intelligent and who are innovative and who just go out and work really, really hard. And you've got to accept that society will have a hierarchy. That's the way that the good Lord has set it up. Some people are going to have good time, and other people are going to have times in their life where they're doing really well, and other times in life when they're not doing really well. So there's always going to be a hierarchy, as it should be. Hierarchies are actually fair, right?
Damien, we forget that conservatives are actually the early revolutionaries. We won the culture wars, and now we are in a position of defending what we won, which is the natural progress of all revolutionaries. And
where do you think we started to lose, Alexandra? Did we start to lose? Was it the 60s where we started to lose? Is it a 70-year thing, or has it been longer than that?
No, it's more like the 1400s. It was a while ago.
I was out by a little. I should be on the American Electoral Commission.
No,
but that's sort of adding up.
You don't keep a close watch for me. I go backwards. Sorry about that. No, so we do have a lot of fight in us. We do have the capability of winning the culture war. It's just a recognition that our position is not one of being subservient to this ideological mob. It's recognizing that what we have, we fought for originally, and it's worth hanging on to. And that was very much the feeling of CPAC. Everyone was ready to stand the ground, and they know they've got a problem with their kids. And it's funny because the kids today, that is actually this divide between Labor and the Greens was an accident that the Labor Party created. They wanted to bring more young Labor voters to their cause. So what they did is they went after the young kids with this whole green world building, with an easy way to get them involved in environmentalism and bring them across that way. And all that happened was they got totally radicalized and taken off to the Greens. So now the Labor Party have got this other force on the left-hand side of them, which is destroying their own party. So all of centrist politics has a big problem now. And I think we eventually will have to fight that together and bring everyone back to what a more centrist position.
Damien, can I ask a question? You mentioned before that the left is winning the culture wars when it comes to the environment and that sort of whole collection of issues, climate change, whatever. Do you think they're winning it on the basis of logic, truth, reason, objectively speaking, or are they winning it on the basis of raw power or clout? I guess the reason I ask that is they're winning it on both.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, my impression is, and I don't really know a whole lot about that field, but if it's anything like a lot of the other debates that we're seeing take place at the moment, it seems to me that the left is not necessarily winning all the debates based on, or certainly not winning all the debates based on logic or reason or evidence, but actually just they basically dominate the institutions. They have the power of big tech behind them. They've really overtaken corporate, massive corporate bodies. They have the universities, they've got the schools, they've got the mainstream media, and because of that, they're simply using it to project their version of reality as truth when in fact it may not be. We're just told that it is.
Yeah, I think that it's been a slow road, but I think, and it all comes out of that critical theory stuff that emerged at the beginning of last century and caused so much joy for the world. But it really, it's embedded in our culture that people don't, when it becomes cultural, you don't see it. This is part of the problem with the ABC as well, I believe, David, to your editorial tonight. The ABC can't see its bias. The people who work at the ABC are so in it, they can't get out of it. And you see that in all organizations. All corporations go through that internal blindness, right? But it's time, as I used to say to my friends at Disney Corporation, it's time to take the Mickey Mouse ears off, guys. It's time to look at the world from the outside in, or look at your organization from the outside in. And see who are the stakeholders that you're supposed to be representing? You're supposed to be representing all Australians, a slice of all of Australia. Is Australia a politically divided country? Yes, our elections would suggest so. Are you reflecting an ideology that's balanced, or at least are you reflecting both sides of the ideology? Now, you look at programs like The Drum, you look at Q&A, you look at
The Project,
news to a certain extent, and you've got this incredible bias towards the left, but they don't see it that way because they're so used to it, and that's how we've lost the culture wars. People are blind to it. It's not till, and I'm an old lefty who flipped to the conservative side once I studied economics and understood free market liberalism.
You do not tell me that.
No. So, but I grew up in Joe Bjelke-Pearson's Queensland, so you can forgive me for being a bit left when I was younger. Not that I respect him now, but there were some serious problems back then with corruption. But the point is, as you educate yourself through life, you do sort of understand things a little differently. And I think we just don't. So we've got to fix education, and we've got to fix the ABC. And I say the ABC because the ABC is taxpayer funded. It's perfectly okay for someone to start a lefty radio network or whatever they want to do. One of the funniest things about the ABC is the fact that it's market preventative. It creates a massive barrier to entry for any lefty commercial organization that wanted to start. I think DMG Group, who are the biggest, people are always complaining about Murdoch. Daily Mirror Group, DMG, the other a British large media organization, tried to set up, I think they own Nova FM, and before Nova was Nova, it was Vega. They tried to set up a talk station in Sydney and Melbourne on the FM band that had kind of an ABC feel. It was meant to be intelligent, not shock jockey. It was meant to be a little bit more centrist than 2UE and 3AW. And it was designed to attract a predominantly female audience that the ABC had in those markets. It failed. Why did it fail? You can't compete with a $1 billion taxpayer-funded monolith like the ABC, commercial free. How could you say, oh, we've got ads, so they don't. So, who are you going to listen to? So the ABC is a barrier to innovation, a barrier to development, even on that protocol.
Let's spitball a little bit. What do you think? And I actually haven't gone into this deep, so I'm not starting with any conclusions or preferred outcomes to this question. It's genuine. It's not rhetorical. How would you restructure tax money to, instead of funding the ABC as a corporate monolith, funding disruptive media? For example, how would you democratize the internet with taxpayer money?
Do you want me to go first?
Anybody? Open question.
I don't want to.
Okay, so you raised two completely different questions there. One was media and the second was the internet. The government needs to stay as far away from the internet as physically possible. The more people touch it, the worse it gets abused by people who want power. So first of all, government, I don't want them to even see the internet.
I don't think that's possible. I think if you're going to subsidise, let's say, platforms like The Good Source, If there was a threshold or some way we could qualify for taxpayer funding, and I prefer the free market if it's a level playing field.
I don't think anyone should.
Damien's point is let's just go with this thought experiment for a second. If you'll indulge me, would there be a qualification of certain budget per viewers? Like you have to generate your own viewers, but once you get them, we'll help you get more. How do you think it might work, Ali?
I don't think it works very well in general. The reason that we have a taxpayer-funded media in the first place is because it was too expensive to set up a media entity inside a country like Australia in the way it was when it was being organised, just because of its vast distances and how much it costs to do that. Now we live in an age where it's relatively simple, historically speaking, for lots of media companies to set up, individual voices to set up, and I think the best thing possible would be to open it up to the free market, to stop the government playing in the media field where it shouldn't be, because all it's done, it hasn't leveled out the media field as far as making it free and open. All it's done is go into a Stalinist-style censorship propaganda machine for whichever government it likes. So it doesn't do any good in the spectrum. All it seems to do is stifle competition on its own side and try and actively go after silencing the other side of politics. As we've seen with the Murdoch Royal Commission, we've got 2 ex-PMs right on terms with Labor, if you ask anybody, trying to get rid of the free press. So they need to just get out of it all. There's plenty of room on the market and let the market compete. And I think we have a much better, healthier press environment. As we've seen with the internet, no one's helped the internet grow, and that's where all the new voices are growing up, including your own.
And I'd have to agree. I mean, I'm trying to workshop it in my mind, Dave, but I'm sort of drawing the same conclusion that Ali is, in the sense that, that question you asked might have worked 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but the environment we're in right now, if there was some sort of a body that, allocated funds to different media outlets, it wouldn't just be about, viewership. It would also be about viewpoints. You would be policed to the hilt, if you express, and it would depend on the, the government or the appointed leader for the time or whatever. But I guarantee there'd be all sorts of these codes of conduct that essentially wouldn't allow any opinions that weren't left wing. So it just, I can't imagine it working.
Your thoughts. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's workable or unworkable?
Well, David, I'm a free market liberal, so I think the best outcome, like Alexandra, will come from just opening it up and just leaving it alone, the laissez-faire approach. I think that there needs to be an anti-monopoly, the basic anti-monopoly and market failure support mechanism. So basically, as Alexandra said, the ABC, part of its original charter was to look after the country, where it wasn't economic for a private business to go out there, and no one would go out and set up broadcasting stations early on. But we're now in the ridiculous situation where we've got the internet, and we've got the taxpayer paying for a squillion digital radio stations, providing nothing but,
fluff.
Pop Asia, pop Desi, pop, which is lovely, in the sense that it's great that we have that cultural mix in Australia. I won't say multiculturalism, but cultural mix. It's lovely, but it's not for the taxpayer to pay for that stuff, especially in a world when you can just jump on Spotify and listen to all of the BTS that you want to listen to, or all the K-pop, or all the Desi pop that you want to listen to. You don't need to have SBS pumping out, a channel like that. Have a look at that digital dial. I mean, there are just so many unnecessary stations on there. Every one of them a barrier to entry for anybody who wants to set up a commercial enterprise. And David, if the government got out of your way, you'd probably have a lot more resources to expand your business. So I think
we can't trust the Liberals either. So we talk about governments who will be funding these things. Look at the but like the Liberal government, I've been watching the legislation they've been trying to pass, including water rights. They're already trying to censor conversation in the internet, and they're the Liberals. And so goodness knows what kind of media empire we'd have if we started letting them interfere in the private sector as far as our media goes. I mean, I think they would kill independent media within a short period of time, simply by backing the horses they like and suffocating out the healthy free market economy.
Here's a question for you guys on this sort of topic. If the ABC could be stripped back to its bare basics, sort of the taxpayer is still funding certain services, which I think that, there's a base level that probably are essential. What would it be? What should taxpayers fund?
I think it'd be easier to allow the taxpayers who wish to subscribe, and they can use that money however they like. And that would force them to direct their resources toward what those people who are subscribing are actually interested in. That'd be the best way to correct it. That's what the BBC has happened to them by force. They are having to strip back and refocus themselves to their core values. I don't know if you've been watching that, but they've got new directors on board because they've lost so many of their subscriptions. They know they're on the wrong track. So I think make it voluntary subscription, then let them work it out themselves, because the market will force them to cut where they have to.
So what about the opinion that the ABC in rural Australia serves the people? Is that a... Say again, Ellie?
I've got the internet. I'm on a dirt road. I don't need the ABC telling me what to listen to. It's not the 1800s.
If the NBN's working, you're good.
I guess that's a fair point.
Well, David, I would disagree with Alexandra there. I don't disagree with Alexandra much, but I do on that particular point simply because you need the content production. It's one thing saying got the access, but who's producing the content? And I think that it isn't commercially viable. The free market fails or would fail to deliver really great rural services. So I think that's the ABC. If I was stripping the ABC back, to come back to the original question, I'd be basically saying, is there anything we're doing that the free market can do better? If so, it is immoral, not just wrong, immoral for us to take taxpayers' money and fund little elite groups of kids in Sydney and Melbourne who want to run their little comedy shows or their little this and that. That's just wrong, you know.
And look,
so we have to say, country services, good quality news, keep the news as balanced as possible, keep it straight, and have foreign correspondence is the other area that I think is commercially non-viable for television networks and Australian media outlets to do foreign correspondence. It's too expensive. And I think Australia needs its foreign correspondence in place. So I'd keep the foreign correspondence, I'd keep the news, I'd keep all of the country and rural services that couldn't be provided by, and then just, you know, let the rest of it go privatized. Don't destroy it. It's a good brand, great business. Let it be privatized, and then they have to get efficient like the rest of us do.
What about really like this comment from Just Saying? This comment is one I really like. $1.1 billion for 1 hour of landline, not good value.
Look, Mid-North Coast, the two most popular read publications are privately owned, and they are being killed by the competition from the ABC. And so it's actually hurting the better content for the rural areas. And what's the third most popular one? Sky News, which is, of course, not Labor.
Yeah.
There you go.
Definitely.
This debate's going to go on, I think.
What were you going to say?
I was just going to suggest that perhaps weather, and there might be some other services around just reporting. I mean, that's apolitical, surely. You know what storm's coming or how much rain's coming. I think that's
keep out of the indoctrination and the opinion. That's not an essential service that the taxpayer needs to be funding. There is certainly plenty of competition, free provision for that reaching everywhere. I can't imagine. I'd be interested in the population of people in Australia. How many can't get commercial services on either internet or other broadcast services? And imagine it's going to be a handful.
Look, the government should have moved in the first year. You know, I've said to people I know within the Liberal Party that you know we maybe have missed the boat in this election cycle, but I don't want to go through another election with one arm tied behind my back as a supporter of conservative values. I don't want to have to be out there tweeting away against $1 billion media empire or producing my podcast, which I do for nothing. It's called The Other Side Australia, by the way. But producing doing that sort of work as a volunteer, fighting this monster. And that's the culture war. And this is what I don't think Scott Morrison gets. We're in a culture war. We're losing. When we win, we've got to seize the day. We can't muck around. We've got to get in there, reform education, reform the media, fix the ABC. Or it's going to be, every election is going to be an uphill battle and unfair, as we saw in Queensland.
El Bunyan says, try listening to the news on a horse.
Kevin Rudd used the Queensland election on the Insiders on Sunday as a way of saying, look how corrupt Murdoch is changing elections. Look what they did to the Queensland election. It was like, did you not watch the Queensland election? Did you not see
Well, it's
how
just
that?
this whole Murdoch. It's an insult to the people who are consuming Murdoch. Murdoch's successful because people buy his papers. So what happened to
How
that?
dare
You know,
anyone vote Liberal? That's
Yeah.
basically what Rudd's done. How dare this is his whole platform.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Hey guys, let's turn it back to the American election. There's a little I don't know if it's fair to call him a troll, but demanding some evidence or examples of voter fraud going on. Who wants to go first? What is the voter fraud that's going on by some other name?
If I'll jump in. So, I mean, obviously there's a whole lot of content out there. There's videos, there's all sorts of stuff. And there's, in the mix of that, a lot of hoax stuff. And people are just producing videos that are clearly fake and are just going to get clicks and shares. But one of the big issues clearly is that Republican observers have been obstructed from being able to view the ballot counting. That seems to be the case. There are affidavits, sworn affidavits that have been submitted to courts expressing that. That is one of the bases on which the Trump team is taking their case to the courts. Another big one is simply the universal mail-out ballot system. I mean, you just workshop this in your head and you think a whole lot of people who have not solicited mail, and millions and millions of these envelopes are going out to addresses all over the country. If someone has died, if they've moved house, they've moved interstate, there are just ballots everywhere. They're lying on doorsteps. They're left in letterboxes for weeks on end, and then a lot of them obviously are returned to post offices too. And if you've got people working in a post office and they all happen to hate Trump, not uncommon these days, then who knows what kind of funny stuff is going to be going on there. I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
The mail-in ballot, let me join that. And look, here's probably a salient point: is setting up the show me an example of voter fraud is probably a convenient test for you to set. Let's, however, agree that we should eliminate the possibility at the very least. Best case scenario, there's no voter fraud, and the election result is verified and declared with full legal confidence from both sides. Wouldn't that be the ideal outcome? However, there isn't confidence in the process at the moment. Just months ago, not 7 or 8 months ago, but like August, court ordered the state of New Jersey election be overturned because of the exploitation of the mail-in ballot system. So there is recent relevant evidence that the system is exploitable. And then it was multiplied on a large scale across all of the United States. To this election, in the state of Nevada, there are many, 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 many thousands of Californians who are registered with an apartment in the state of Nevada as well, so that they can claim the tax state laws, which are essentially far more friendly than the socialist nightmare state of California. So they live in California, and we all know how Californians vote en masse, but they are registered to vote in Nevada, and they vote twice. Now, there has been at least 3,000 people's names on the change of address register, which is a thing in America, a publicly searchable list of people who have change of address mail redirections in place, and they have been registered as changing their address from Nevada to somewhere else, and yet having voted and being registered to vote in Nevada still. So those people received ballots and don't live in Nevada. I mean, at the very least, these kind of things, and the presumption or the statistic is that something like only a third of people who have changed addresses register their changed address. So when you found 3,000, that's all that's on, when only a third of actual people are on the list, there's likely 9,000 to 10,000 who are actually no longer residents of Nevada but voted there, or were at least sent ballots to vote there. Now, again, I'm not saying this is absolute evidence. I'm saying these irregularities and massive opportunities to drive a cruise ship through have been discovered, and they have to be tested legally and properly so that Americans can have confidence in the election outcome. Because we've just seen recently, as I said a minute ago, in New Jersey, this happens. It's not a myth. And you've spent 4 years telling us about how the 2016 election was interfered with by Russians.
Well, there
It's
are
crazy.
there are two big ones. There's the dirty rolls they're talking about, which is what you're saying. There are more people who are registered, who are voting than are registered. But the other thing that has really got me about the voting fraud in this election is where they go and they ballot harvest. So they go to poor areas and they offer people money for their votes in these poor areas en masse. And I think that is the worst attribute that a Democrat can do, which is to exploit the poor for power when they are the people who most need their vote in order to change their circumstance. And I don't think enough people are talking about that practice. And that's not a fake news practice. That's a real practice I know about. They've had to try and outlaw in various areas. It's still happening. It recounts for thousands and thousands of votes, and it's just an abuse of each other in society, and something that you have to wonder at the sort of morality that exists in people who can organize that for a party in order to claim power. That has just affected me beyond all words.
And Dave, as you were saying, those 3,000 votes, because I've read the same story, they're the ones that have been discovered. Like you said, there's potentially a whole lot more that haven't been. But the point is, I guess,
Exactly.
the Trump team has to prove, that only what they bring before the courts can be seen as, these votes need to be rejected or whatever. And so I think on that basis, from all the things I've seen, if the way that the courts behave is to say, only if you can prove a vote is fraudulent will we reject it, I don't think that's going to be enough for Trump to gain a victory through the courts. But if the amount of voter fraud and the style of it and the various forms of it are enough in any given jurisdiction, any given state, that may be enough for to trigger the court to do what they did in New Jersey and say, we need to actually rerun this. And then I'd say Trump's maybe got a foot in.
Yep.
So it really depends on how they
Another major irregularity which reeks of fraud without being provable until investigated, which is what the litigation is for, is the old age nursing homes, the retirement villages, where they have had massive amounts of people, like vastly increased numbers of votes than they've ever had before. Like all of a sudden it's up 1,000%, 10 times as many people are voting as they were before. And on those ballots, only one box was ticked. They could have voted for the presidency, the Senate, the House, propositions, various things that are being tested in their area, and they only marked one for Joe Biden. They only marked the box for Joe Biden, didn't care about anything else on the ballot. And that's roughly coincidental. That phenomenon is, sure that happened. Isn't it remarkable that it's roughly coincidental with the amount of increased votes that have never voted before in those kind of percentages? Again, you have to look at these things. You have to verify the signatures, the identity, and all of the rules that are in place to check that they are valid votes, because it's such open opportunities for exploitation and irregularities.
Yeah.
And I think, as you guys have said, if the internet is not the place for it to be sorted out. I mean, as you say, there's so much, fake news from both sides going around. As Rudy Giuliani said, and as Senator Ted Cruz said on Fox News yesterday, I think that we've got the great thing about America is they've got a process. There is a process for this. It's got to be allowed to play out, though. And whilst again, I don't discredit Joe Biden for his eagerness to jump on a victory here and for them to do the PR thing and make the most out of it. That's inevitable. It is not appropriate for Donald Trump to concede at this point. And so,
exactly right.
It's wrong for people to be saying to Donald Trump, you've got to concede. It's the right thing to do to concede. And you're being, they're trying to paint this picture of the stubborn, selfish Trump refusing to give in. He's a sore loser, the sore loser message. No, it's not the time yet. We've got to let the process run its course, not just for Trump, but for Biden. Because if Biden's presidency is in any way seen as illegitimate, it's going to impact his mandate and his moral.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. My whole world is numbers. I program, And the most reliable figure is the in-person vote. And I suspect what happened was Trump probably won in a landslide based upon the figures that he got in the actual polling booth. And then the Democrats overplayed their hand trying to take the election. And what happened was we ended up with votes that were beyond the statistical probabilities of the election. And
we've never seen an election like this before.
No, it's not. I mean, people forget that Trump's got more votes than anyone's ever got for president. And we're supposed to believe that Biden mailed it in. It's not. It doesn't. It defies statistical probability. And when you look at
one thing I would insert there is, I think maybe conservatives haven't fully grappled with this, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the Trump or the anti-Trump rage vote. Do you know what I mean? I mean, basically, 100%.
Like you got 110%.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, statistically, you're right.
Yeah, I don't mean like lots of people voted in. I mean the mail vote. You mail votes out to everybody, and they all come back in a non-compulsory election when that has never happened before. It doesn't.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
One thing I think is really important to remember is that and I didn't realize this, but there's 150 million votes cast in the presidential election. 60 million of them were mail-in. That's a massive proportion, and another 40 million were pre-poll, in-person pre-poll. So that's 100 million out of 150. Only 50 million votes were on the day in person, so only 1/3 of them. And what this means, that I think is quite interesting, is if there is a recount ordered in some of those really close states that I was talking about earlier, that recount, just as the mail-in votes have favored Biden, any recount is going to favor Trump statistically. Because the votes that are most challenged and most likely to have a challenge upheld are always the mail-ins.
You're right.
And they're mostly votes. So there's that.
Some impression.
Sorry, I missed that.
Can you all hear me okay? I think even my clock is now backing up a little.
Yeah, only just
Breaking up a tiny bit there.
Yeah, can you hear me?
It's pretty sketchy at the moment still.
Do you want us to talk rubbish while you're
I just have to with it. I'll leave it with you guys.
Did anybody have a comment on the Four Corners episode last night? Did anybody see that?
I'm out. I didn't see it. So
I also missed it. I mean, I heard some of the rumors. I saw a write-up afterwards, but I'm not particularly across it. So, but give us your thoughts, Damien.
Is this the bonking ban one with the
That's
two?
the one.
Is this when Trump decided? Not Trump, Jesus. Is this when Turnbull decided to go out and just throw some of his ex-ministers in hot water? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So this is Louise Milligan and Turnbull at it. Louise Milligan is the ABC reporter who did the book on Cardinal Pell. Not to get into that debate, but she is somebody who does bring to the table a very neo-Marxist critical theory perspective, I think, to her writing and her reporting. And so it's no surprise that it was very much she was conflating gender, workplace harassment with people having affairs. And there is an overlap. Obviously, the two issues are related in that sort of Canberra bubble of stress and late night work and people being away from home.
Let's flip this on you. I'm tired of being the girl on the "are you harassed at work" kind of discussion. So how about you boys? Do you get harassed at work? Is it something you struggle with? Do you think we need legislation to protect you guys?
No, I don't need legislation to protect myself, but I would say my rule has always been and will always be, in the workplace, it's not appropriate. You leave your, sexual delights behind, preferably within your marriage, I hope. But the point is, you're putting yourself, if you're a senior person and you've got junior people who are working for you, it's very important that you keep a very, very safe distance. And for men today, that means, unfortunately, perhaps not getting into too much of mentoring. There's a bit of a concern in corporates that men are now shying away from mentoring young women, which is a shame, but I think necessary given the risk for corporate men. And certainly cabinet ministers should know better. I don't think the ABC report was completely without merit. I think there's some really important issues about the culture in Canberra. I think Turnbull said it was like corporate world 40 years ago. If that's the case, then it does need to be cleaned up a little bit. But I do, I think it's incumbent upon men, particularly in senior roles, to act appropriately. It's also incumbent upon men to be aware that young women will use their sexual power for advancement. And that is something that I've been subject to. And the solution to that is you never leave yourself alone in a room with a young female employee. You always make sure you've got other people around. You've got confidence and trust and faith with your other senior female employees, because they'll spot it first.
I need to stop you there, because that, like, as a young woman in the workforce, I used to be in charge of a lot of people. Even though I'm quite young, I was actually in charge of the office. And there is no way that I could have done my job as a senior figure and a young woman in the office if I couldn't be alone with any of my male staff, if I came from retail. So I was actually in the minority. So I had chaperones me every time I had private conversations with my staff in training and in business and all the deals that I brokered. I hate, and so do a lot of women I speak to and work with, we hate the idea that we have to be protected and sheltered in the workplace, that we are not able to hold our ground ourselves on our own and deal with adult relationships, both in business and in our private lives. We absolutely hate it. It's done nothing but set women's roles back in the workforce. 50 years, it's like the whole women's empowerment movement never happened. And suddenly, not only can we not be trusted, but men can't deal with things in adult fashion. I think we need to just leave that alone. If you make a path to someone that doesn't work, okay, move on.
I'm looking for a trainee at the moment, somebody to come on and learn the roles and get paid barely anything to help a good source grow to the next level. There is no way I would risk hiring an employee who's female and being alone with her frequently at, possibly 20 years younger than me. No way. When accusation, and here's the problem, here's the reason, is because all it takes is an accusation. All it takes is an accusation. There is no, and that's legally. If I'm accused, legally I'm in trouble. That's just not socially. Socially, my character and reputation will be impugned, and everything we're trying to achieve here, an easy opportunity for somebody to come in and bring it down if it was considered a threat. Legally, there are countless stories of the risks and liabilities of a mere accusation being brought down, and the hand that is tied behind the back of male defendants. So it is way, way, way too risky. And so that's terrible. It's terrible.
I want you three to think about what you just said, which is valid in the law, but where do you think that leaves someone like me, where I can't be mentored? I'm not going to be hired. You just said you wouldn't hire me. So I can't get a job in order to climb the ladder.
It's absolutely... Yeah, it's absolutely a minefield. I mean, I definitely empathise with you. And a part of the issue here, obviously, is that what the three of us might say could sound like an accusation towards all women or most women or whatever. And obviously, the great majority of people are honest and they're well-meaning and they're not going to do anything wrong. And that goes for both men and women. But I think what Dave's saying is that if someone really had it out for the good source, and he was looking to hire someone and they came on board almost in a covert fashion, or they were hired on a good faith basis, but then for some reason their mindset changed and they thought, I'm going to bring this guy down. Like Dave said, all it takes is an accusation. That's not any sort of statement about women in general or the character of women or the difference between the sexes. It's simply a reality of the current situation. Perhaps it's the fault of the Me Too movement or whatever other cultural dynamics are going on.
The fruit of feminism.
And so it's a tiny fraction of women to do it, but where does the blame get laid? On all women. And so what do we end up with? Men, once again, holding all the positions in the media, mentoring each other, and women are unable to get a position. Now, I'm not a feminist. You know that. I'm an egalitarian. And it is atrocious that all of my friends, we have the same problem. We're highly skilled. We are very responsible. We are business people, and yet we have now just been pushed to the back of the deck, and we are going to have nothing and nowhere to go because even your good gentlemen themselves, we've got nowhere.
You're 100% right. You're preaching to the choir. In fact, it's worse than what you say, because I have half the talent pool to draw from. My business is handicapped and hamstrung because I've got less recruits to choose from. I'm missing out on potentially, the top 50%, to be generous. But you know, the idea, the eligible, qualified, suitable, available candidate pool is potentially halved by this reality, and it is the fruit of feminism. And if we had a justice system that paid no regard to identity, if Lady Justice was blind and the scales were unbiased and uninfluenced, then I'd be happy to take the risk based on evidence being required to condemn me. But it's not an equal justice system. So both employers and female employees are disadvantaged by that particular dynamic.
It's not a safe space for men.
It's rubbish. I want Me Too to bugger off and for the social movement to stop being so precious and fragile with each other all the time. If you have a serious problem, take it to court. Everything else, get over it and let everyone else get on with the dishes.
Well, we already have laws that prevent sexual harassment. We already have those laws. We already have rules of evidence that have to be met. It is terribly unfortunate that those rules of evidence for genuine cases where there's a genuine victim, that sometimes you're going to see guilty people get off free. But you know, that's our legal system. I mean, you've got it. It's better that what's the old saying? You know, it's better that 100
and guilty men go free.
Man goes to jail, or woman. But it's the
in Blackstone.
Incredibly difficult and sad issue, and I think we've just all got to be more professional. We've got to all be more responsible, men, women, everybody. And I think it speaks to a broader decline in our social values around sexuality and around behaviour.
Around honesty as well.
But, you know, I think we've got to clean up our act a little bit. I think when you're getting to the point where you've got video clips like WAP on television, society's got an issue.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Hey,
myself and make my own podcasts.
Sorry, Ellie.
What was that? Sorry, Ellie?
In the meantime, I'll just sit here by myself, you know, make my own podcasts and wait for.
No, this is perfect. This digital distance is totally acceptable.
Yeah.
That must be the new normal. I'm not having this digital distance safe space, whatever it's supposed to be.
It is horrific, and yeah, we got to find solutions and workarounds. But I don't know that it's.
It could be US elections.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I think I was actually having internet trouble at the time. Maybe somebody asked about what's going on in Canberra at the moment.
Oh, that was right. It was you, Damien. This is your fault.
My fault. You want to feel half an hour to clear up gender issues?
It is getting close to the time where we need to wrap up. We've just dropped 15% of our audience across the various channels we're broadcasting on right now. But a huge thank you to those people who joined us tonight in the comments section. Apologies for the glitches with the NBN failing at the studio. But thankfully this software is good enough to be able to jump in on my mobile and or any other device nice and easily. If you are a Good Source supporter, thank you very much. You've helped to build the studio that we're in and broadcasting from, and the research and writing time that's necessary, the production time for all the various shows that are on. Really appreciate that. If you'd like to become a Good Source supporter and help us grow to include new voices and more content, just head to the website goodsource.news. That's SAUCE, goodsource.news, and click on the button to donate, or and just type in goodsource.news /support, and we would love to include you in those ranks there to help us keep on growing. The studio has got a couple of $1,000 left of spending to be completed. It's ready, but it's not finished. I don't know if you can hear the echoes in here, but there's a lot of soundproofing that needs to be done yet, and we don't even have a sound desk. We're borrowing one at the moment, so a couple of $1,000 for those. That's really great, and thank you to the Good Source supporters. Speaking of other content and other shows, tomorrow night at this time, 8 p.m. Sydney time, 7 p.m. Brisbane time, we've got a really great special edition of Mundine's Truth Talking. It's called "What the Hell is Going On in the Northern Territory?" And the panel is going to be just two of Australia's most outspoken Aboriginal identities, conservatives, of course. That's Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price. And we're going to be talking about the terrible situation of political correctness in the Northern Territory, of which children are the first and worst victims. It's an endemic problem going on there. And we're going to have Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price talking amongst themselves about what the solution is and how we can move forward. And I would love you to join in the comments and tell your friends and invite them. 8 p.m. Sydney, 7 p.m. Brisbane time. And you'll be able to tune into that on the Good Source Facebook and YouTube page, as well as Warren Mundine's Facebook page and the Good Source website tomorrow night. But that's it. Let's have some final thoughts. Zoom around the panel. Damien, I want to start with you. We'll have ladies last tonight in the spirit of egalitarianism. And Damien, it's been such a pleasure to get to know you, fellow Brisbaneite. We are definitely going to have to catch up for a coffee sooner or later, and maybe get you into the studio and hear your life story. But your final thoughts for the evening, reflecting on any part of the conversation or anything random.
Well, I think we've got to pray for peace and understanding, and I hope that you know, I got a little bit. I was very uplifted when I heard Joe Biden, as well as all the schmaltzy stuff. He delivered some pretty important classical liberal ideas about self-motivation and individualism and not falling into that victim consciousness of identity politics or critical theory. I thought that was really great. And then Kamala Harris, you know, we hear from her, and she's basically saying, you voted for character, you voted for substance, you voted for science, you voted for, which is basically another way of saying the rest of you who didn't vote this way are a bunch of deplorables. You have no science, you have no character, you have no kindness. So that's not unifying, and that's not empathy, which is what they're pushing. So we need real empathy, we need real unity. And I hope and pray that whoever wins in the end, and it probably will be President Joe Biden in the end, but I hope that he is able to deliver real unity and real empathy and really does listen to the other half of the country.
Yeah, awesome. Bert, thank you for joining us tonight. Sorry, Damien, before you go, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yes. So the podcast is called The Other Side Australia, meaning the other side, the bit you're not hearing from the ABC. It is searchable on, we're on YouTube, we're on all the normal podcast channels, Apple and Spotify. But you've got to put the Australia in, or you get all sorts of other sides. So the Other Side Australia we will pop up. You'll see our little orange logo and my name on there, and then just subscribe to that. It's on YouTube if you want the easiest way. If you're not a podcast person, just jump on YouTube. It's there. But it's audio only. I'm a radio guy. Good face for radio. So I'll do that.
Oh, we've tricked you into video, but thank you very much. But your final thoughts for the evening?
Yeah, I think for me it comes back to this notion of objective truth. With not only the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, we didn't get to that, but that was, that really got to me a couple of weeks ago. And then, of course, we've had all the gaslighting with, President-elect Joe Biden and all of that. The problem we have at the moment in the West is that we don't just have different interpretations of the same facts. We've actually got two separate sets of facts. We've got two alternate realities side by side. And if anything can be said about the media in 2020, what it did is it turned half the population into conspiracy theorists. Not really, but allegedly. And it's actually a really terrible thing. And if you boil it all down, to me, what's at play here is the fact that we've actually abandoned the idea of objective truth in the West. We built our societies on that. We built our common understanding, our civil discourse on the belief that there is such thing as objective truth. We've just got different perspectives on it. But we've abandoned that now, and we're seeing the fruits of it. I think we actually need to come back to a place. For me, obviously, the foundation for that is the Christian faith. And I don't know where else you can find it, to be honest. But we somehow need to find objective truth again, or I don't know where this is going to go, to be honest. So that didn't end on a very hopeful note, but it's a really important call back to objective truth.
And where can people find more of the great thinking from Kurt Malberg?
So I am at Twitter at K_Malberg. You can find me on Facebook, Kurt Malberg, as well. And I have a blog called Cross and Culture. So if you just search Cross and Culture blog, you'll find me there. I also have a book coming out soon by the same title. So keep your eye out for that.
I'm looking forward to reading that. I've got a preview copy, so I can do a nice little review, and I promise I will do that as soon as possible.
Cheers, Dave.
Ellie Melly, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Where can people find you, and your final thoughts for the evening?
Well, it is my hope that Scott Morrison learns from the mistakes of the United States of America in this election period. It is my suspicion that he will not, based upon what we've seen in the last couple of days. You can find me at my Twitter. I'm Ellie Melly. I'm also over on Parler, and I have my blog, elliemelly. I think it's the link's at the top of my page. You can shout me a coffee if you like what I have to say. And I write for various publications. You can find me, of course, on The Good Source, Penthouse, and The Spectator.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your company tonight. Thank you again to the supporters. Please make sure, if I keep sharing just random, not random, but pedestrian, average kind of debates and queries about the US political, my Facebook page is going to be shut down. Good Source is going to be shut down. Every single conservative outlet is going to be shut down. So please head to the Good Source website right now and hit subscribe to the newsletter. Give us your email address. That way, when we disappear into the ether without a trace, we'll be able to come find you and tell you where to get us next, because it is a matter of when, not if. And the only way to fight fake news is to make sure you're getting it for yourself and supporting those people that you love. So support all of these guys, get their shows, get their podcasts, wade into Twitter and try and have some fun there. But that's it for tonight. Tonight's episode of Pellowe Talk Live, and I hope to see you on Mundine's Truth Talking, same time tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Sydney, 7 p.m. Brisbane. Good night, everyone, and God bless you.
Everyone.